When my lazy parents found out my new salary, they did not bring flowers. They brought a calculator. By the time the cheap supermarket cake hit my kitchen counter, they had already decided exactly how much of my life now belonged to them. What they did not know was that the last time they treated me like a walking ATM, I quietly turned every favor, every guilt trip, and every sacrifice into paperwork that could finally set me free. My name is Aubrey Keene, and for the last 10 minutes, I had been staring at a number on my laptop screen that did not look real. Outside my apartment window, the Columbus rain was doing its best to wash the gray off the city streets, drumming a steady, drowning rhythm against the glass. Inside, the silence was total, save for the hum of my refrigerator and the blood rushing in my ears. The email from HR at Lila Finch Analytics was short, professional, and life-altering. Subject line: promotion and compensation adjustment. I read the figure again: $112,000. My salary had not just increased, it had doubled. I sat frozen in my thrifted ergonomic chair, my fingers hovering over the trackpad. For the first time in my 28 years of life, I was safe. This number meant I could max out my retirement contributions. It meant I could upgrade my car before the transmission finally gave up the ghost. It meant I could buy a house with a yard and a fence and a lock that actually worked. It was freedom, distilled into pixels and commas. I opened my mouth to let out a breath, maybe even a laugh, but the sound never came.
Bang, bang, bang.
The noise shattered the quiet like a gunshot. It came from my front door. 3 heavy, rhythmic strikes that were too aggressive to be a neighbor and too entitled to be a delivery driver. My stomach dropped. The warm glow of the promotion instantly replaced by a cold, familiar knot of dread. I did not have to guess who it was. I stood up, my legs feeling strangely heavy, and walked to the entryway. The peephole confirmed my fear. Distorted by the fisheye lens, my parents stood in the hallway. My father, Mark, was wearing his good windbreaker, the one he saved for church and loan applications. My mother, Linda, was clutching a white plastic grocery bag that sagged under the weight of a square box. They were smiling, but the smiles did not reach their eyes. Their eyes were sharp, bright, and hungry. I unlocked the deadbolt. I had barely turned the handle before the door was pushed open from the other side. "Surprise!" Linda cried out, her voice pitching up into a register that was meant to sound cheerful, but just sounded shrill. She bustled past me, bringing the smell of damp wool and stale cigarette smoke into my clean living room. "We tried to call, but we figured, why not just come celebrate in person?" "Celebrate?" I asked, my voice tight. I closed the door, the latch clicking shut with a finality I did not like. Celebrate what? Mark followed her in, not even looking at me. He was already scanning the room. His gaze flicked from my new flat-screen television to the leather armchair I had found at an estate sale, calculating the resale value of everything he saw. "Don't play coy, Aubrey," Mark said, chuckling as if we shared a joke. "We heard the good news. Big promotion. Senior analyst, right?" My blood ran cold. I had told no one. I had received the email 11 minutes ago. The only time the title had been visible was earlier today, on a shared printer tray at the office. For maybe 30 seconds before I snatched it up, someone had seen it. Someone had talked. And somehow, that talk had traveled from a corporate high-rise in downtown Columbus all the way to the suffocating suburbs where my parents lived. Linda set the grocery bag on my kitchen island, the island I kept meticulously clear of clutter, and pulled out a plastic container. Inside was a generic vanilla sheet cake, the kind with neon yellow frosting that leaves a film on the roof of your mouth. It looked like it had been sitting on the bakery shelf for 3 days. "We got cake," Linda said, peeling the lid off. She did not ask for plates. She did not ask how I was. She sat down at one of my bar stools, the wood creaking under her shift in weight, and reached into her oversized purse. Instead of a knife to cut the cake, she pulled out a ballpoint pen and a small notepad. She clicked the pen. The sound was sharp in the small room. "So," she said, looking at me with the same expression she used to wear when she caught me hiding birthday money, What are we talking? Aubrey? Yearly? Give us the number. I stood by the door, feeling like an intruder in my own home. Mom, I just found out. I haven't even signed the paperwork yet. Oh, stop it, Mark said. He leaned against the counter, pulling his smartphone from his pocket. He tapped the screen, the bright light illuminating his face, and opened the calculator app. He held it ready, his thumb hovering over the keypad. We are family. We just want to understand your situation so we can help you manage it. You know how you get with numbers. You get overwhelmed. I was a senior data analyst. My entire career was built on managing numbers. The insult was so casual, so practiced, that it almost didn't sting. Almost. I am fine, Dad, I said, trying to keep my voice level. I appreciate the cake, but I'm really tired. It has been a long week. We drove 40 minutes to be here, Linda snapped, her tone shifting instantly from celebratory to victimized. 40 minutes in the rain, Aubrey, with your father's bad back, and you are going to stand there and be rude? I am not being rude. I am being private. Linda sighed, a long, rattling exhalation that filled the room. She looked at Mark, shaking her head. This is what happens. You raise them. You sacrifice everything. And the minute they get a little bit of money, they think they are better than you. I don't think I am better than you, I said, walking further into the room, creating distance between myself and the door. I just don't understand why you need to know my exact salary. Because we are a team, Mark said, his voice booming. He gestured around the apartment with his phone. Look at this place. Aubrey, you are living like a queen. Meanwhile, your mother and I are drowning. The heating bill is up. The car needs new tires. We put everything we had into you. Everything. Here it comes, I thought, the ledger. Do you know how much formula cost in 1996? Linda asked, tapping the pen against the notepad. Do you know how much we spent on your braces? On your school clothes? We went without so you could have... And now that you have made it, you are acting like we are strangers begging for change. I send you money every month, I said, my voice trembling slightly. I sent you $400 last week for the utility bill. $400, Mark scoffed, typing the number into his calculator and shaking his head. Peanuts. That doesn't even cover the interest on the debt we took out to raise you. He turned to me, his face hardening. The mask of the proud father slipped completely, revealing the desperate, grasping man underneath. We did the math on the way over, Mark said. He did not sound emotional anymore. He sounded like he was closing a business deal. Based on the average salary for a senior analyst in this state, plus your bonus structure, we know you are pulling in at least 6 figures now. I said nothing. My silence was confirmation enough. So, Mark continued, taking a step toward me, here is what is going to happen. You are going to transfer 50% of your monthly net income to our joint account. We will handle the allocation. We will use it to pay off the family debts, fix up the house, and get us back on our feet. It is a fair family contribution. I stared at him. 50%? It is temporary, Linda added quickly, her eyes wide and earnest, though her hand was still poised over the notepad like a waitress taking a dinner order. Just until we are settled, maybe 5 or 6 years. You are young, Aubrey. You don't have kids. You don't have real responsibilities. You can live on half. You are used to living small. Half, I repeated, the word tasting like ash. You want half my salary, for 5 years. Don't make it sound like a punishment, Mark warned, his voice dropping an octave. It is your duty. The Bible says honor your father and mother. It doesn't say honor them only when it is convenient. It says honor them. I looked at them, really looked at them. I saw the way Linda's eyes were darting around the room, already mentally spending money she did not have. I saw the way Mark gripped his phone, his thumb twitching, ready to do the math that would bleed me dry. And I realized something that made the panic recede, leaving a cold, hard clarity in its wake. They were not surprised. They had not come here to congratulate me. They had not come to share in my success. They had come to harvest it. They looked at me, And they did not see a daughter. They saw a resource. They saw a walking, breathing ATM that had finally dispensed a winning ticket. The leak at the office. It didn't matter who it was. What mattered was that my parents had been waiting for this moment. They had been tracking my career, waiting for the salary bump that would make me worth squeezing. I felt the old reflex to argue, to scream, to cry and list my own bills, my student loans, the rent that was due on the first, but I stopped myself. Arguments never worked with Mark and Linda Keene. Logic was water off a duck's back. Emotion was just fuel for their guilt machine. If I yelled, they would cry. If I cried, they would bully. If I reasoned, they would twist my words until I was apologizing for existing. I took a deep breath. The air in the apartment felt heavy, charged with the electricity of a storm that had been brewing for 20 years. "Okay," I said softly. Mark's eyebrows shot up. Linda sat up straighter, the pen hovering. "Okay?" Mark asked, a grin breaking across his face. "See? I told you. Linda, she is a good girl. She knows what is right." "If we are going to talk about what is fair," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the thumping of my heart, "and if we are going to talk about contributions and debts, I should probably show you something." I turned my back on them. I felt their eyes boring into my shoulder blades, hot and expectant. They probably thought I was going to get my checkbook. They probably thought I was going to get cash. I walked over to the console table in the hallway, the one I had bought at a garage sale and refinished myself. I reached into the decorative bowl where I kept my keys and fished out a small, silver key. I knelt down and inserted the key into the lock of the bottom drawer. Click. The sound was small, but in the silence of the room, it echoed. I pulled the drawer open. There was nothing inside except for a single, slim, white envelope. It was sealed. On the front, in my own handwriting, was a date from 3 years ago. I picked it up. It felt light in my hand, but I knew the weight of what was inside. I stood up and turned back to face them. I walked to the kitchen island and placed the envelope on the counter, right next to the sweating store-bought cake. "What is that?" Linda asked, her nose wrinkling. "Is that a check?" "No," I said. "It is not a check." I rested my fingertips on the envelope. This was not a spur-of-the-moment reaction. This was not a tantrum. This was the moment I had been secretly preparing for since the day I realized that my parents did not love me. They only loved what I could provide. "Open it," I said. Mark looked at Linda, then back at me. He reached out, his hand greedy and impatient, and snatched the envelope from the table. The paper tore. I watched them, my face perfectly calm, while inside, the terrified little girl I used to be finally went quiet, making room for the woman who was about to burn the bridge while she was still standing on it. As my father's thumb hooked under the flap of the envelope, time seemed to warp, stretching and thinning until the kitchen in Columbus dissolved entirely. I was not standing in my high-rise apartment anymore. I was back in the suffocating beige living room of our rental house just outside Dayton, Ohio, breathing in the stale cocktail of pine air freshener and cigarette smoke that defined my entire childhood. Growing up, the concept of a job was something other people had. For Linda and Mark, employment was always a theoretical concept, something they were perpetually between or considering. They were allergic to the mundane grind of a 9-to-5. My father called himself an entrepreneur, though his ventures mostly involved buying broken electronics at yard sales and intending to fix them. My mother called herself a homemaker, though the house was rarely clean and dinner was usually whatever could be heated in a microwave. They were not unlucky, they were just lazy. But in their narrative, they were the victims of a cruel, unseen system designed to keep good people down. I learned the currency of our household before I learned long division. Everything came with a price tag, but the bill was never paid in money. It was paid in guilt. I remembered being 12 years old, standing in the doorway with a permission slip for a field trip to the Science Museum. It cost $8. My mother was on the couch, watching a daytime talk show, a fresh pack of menthols on the cushion beside her. $8, she had sighed. taking a drag and blowing the smoke toward the ceiling fan. Do you know how many hours your father has to not work to— She caught herself, then pivoted. Do you know what we sacrifice so you can go look at dinosaur bones? We feed you, we clothe you, and now you want luxury trips. She signed the slip eventually, but not before looking me dead in the eye and saying the phrase that would become the soundtrack of my life. You will pay us back someday, Aubrey, mark my words. It was not a figure of speech. By the time I was 16, I was working 20 hours a week bagging groceries at the local supermarket. On Fridays, I would cash my check, usually around $150, and come home to find them waiting. They did not demand the money with a gun. They demanded it with silence. They would sit at the kitchen table, a pile of unpaid bills spread out like a fan of playing cards, sighing loudly until I placed the cash on the formica. Good girl, my father would say, pocketing the money without counting it. We are short on the cable bill this month. This helps. The next day, I would see new cartons of cigarettes on the fridge, or a premium streaming service added to the TV, or a bag of expensive beef jerky on the counter. The electric bill would remain unpaid until the final notice came, pink and threatening. That was when my second job began. I became the administrator of their chaos. While other juniors in high school were worrying about prom dates or varsity tryouts, I was on the phone with the water company, deepening my voice to sound like Linda, begging for an extension. I was the one filling out the darker, more complex corners of the FAFSA forms, trying to explain why our household income was zero, but our expenses were somehow funded by miscellaneous family contributions, which was just code for me. I became an expert in the bureaucracy of poverty. I knew exactly how many days you could go past a due date before the lights cut out. I knew which neighbors would let us borrow a cup of milk without asking for it back. And I knew that my parents were not helpless. They were just comfortable with being carried. But the moment that truly broke something inside me, the moment that turned my resentment into a cold, hard resolve, happened when I was 17. I had come home from school early because of a cancellation. The house was quiet. I walked into the kitchen and found my father sitting at the table with a glossy application form for a department store credit card. He had a pen in his hand, and he was practicing a signature on a scrap piece of paper. My signature. I froze, my backpack sliding off my shoulder. Dad, what are you doing? He didn't jump. He didn't look guilty. He just looked annoyed that I had interrupted his focus. Just handling some paperwork. Aubrey, we need a new vacuum. The old one is spitting dust. That is my name, I said, stepping closer. You are applying for a credit card in my name. Your mother and I have bad credit, he said matter-of-factly, as if discussing the weather. The system is rigged against us, but you have a clean slate. We get the card, we buy the vacuum, maybe some new clothes for you for school, and I pay it off. It builds your credit score. I am doing you a favor. You can't sign my name, I whispered, panic rising in my throat. That is fraud. He slammed the pen down. It is just paper. God, you are so dramatic. It is a family resource. Do you think the food in your stomach just appears? Do you think the roof over your head is free? We have carried you for 17 years. The least you can do is lend us your credit score for a vacuum cleaner. He signed it right in front of me, a loopy, shaky version of my name that looked nothing like how I wrote it. He mailed it the next day. I spent the next 3 weeks checking the mailbox every afternoon, terrifyingly anxious, until the rejection letter came because I was a minor and he had messed up the birth date. He forgot about it instantly. I never did. 2 years later, the final severing happened. I had earned a near-full scholarship to a university in Michigan. It was my escape hatch. I had worked for 4 years to get those grades, studying by flashlight when the power was cut, writing essays on the backs of old flyers. When I showed them the acceptance letter, there was no hugging. There was no, "We are so proud." Linda stared at the paper as if it were a court summons. "Michigan, you are leaving?" "It is a great school, Mom, and with the scholarship, it is almost free." "Free for you," she spat, throwing the letter onto the coffee table. But what about us? Who is going to drive me to my appointments? Who is going to handle the bills? You are just going to abandon us after we raised you? After we sacrificed everything? I have to go to college, I said, my voice shaking but my feet planted firm. I want a future. Family doesn't forget who owes what, Mark shouted from the recliner. You think you are too good for this house? You think you are better than us because you read some books? You owe us, Aubrey. You owe us for your life. The fight lasted for 3 days. It culminated on a Tuesday afternoon. Linda was screaming that I was a parasite, that I breathed their air for free and gave nothing back. Something in me went quiet. The anger evaporated, replaced by a numbness that felt like armor. I walked into my bedroom. I did not slam the door. I pulled 2 suitcases out from under my bed, suitcases I had bought at a thrift store 6 months prior, and started packing. I took only what I had paid for myself, my clothes, my books, the laptop I had bought with my grocery store wages. I walked out of that house 20 minutes later. Linda was still screaming in the kitchen, listing my debts, the dental work, the school shoes, the gasoline. Mark didn't even look up from the television. I got into my rusted sedan, the one I bought for $500 from a neighbor, and I drove. I didn't cry until I crossed the state line. The first year in the dorms was a blur of exhaustion. While other students were partying or joining sororities, I was working the night shift at the library and weekends at a campus coffee shop. I ate instant noodles 5 nights a week. I sewed up holes in my socks instead of buying new ones. Every time I felt weak, every time I missed the familiarity of home, I would remember my father's hand forging my signature. I would remember Linda's voice tallying up the cost of my existence. I will never be financially trapped by them again, I whispered to myself in the dark of my dorm room, staring at the glow of the streetlights on the ceiling. I will never let them hold a ledger over my head. I built my life like a fortress. Every dollar I saved was a brick. Every promotion was a reinforced gate. I thought I had escaped them. I thought distance and silence would be enough. But standing in my Columbus kitchen, watching Mark tear open the envelope with his greedy, sausage-like fingers, I realized I had been naive. They were not just bad parents. They were creditors who believed they owned the copyright to my life. They thought the envelope contained a check. They thought it was the first installment of their 50%. They thought they had won. I watched Mark pull the paper out. It was a single sheet, thick and crisp. He unfolded it, his eyes scanning the header, expecting to see a bank logo or a routing number. I saw the moment his brain registered what he was looking at. His brow furrowed. The greedy smile faltered, then vanished entirely, replaced by a look of sheer, uncomprehending confusion. "What is this?" he muttered. "This isn't a check." "No," I said, my voice cool and steady, echoing the numbness I had found the day I left home. "It is a receipt and a contract." They had spent 20 years keeping a tally of everything I cost them. They didn't know that for the last 5 years. I had been keeping a tally of my own, and unlike theirs, mine was notarized. Columbus was not a city of glamour, but for me, it was a sanctuary of anonymity. After escaping the suffocating orbit of my parents' house, I did not land softly. I crashed into the reality of adulthood with nothing but student loans and a desperate need for silence. My early 20s were a blur of unpaid internships and coffee runs, trading sleep for the chance to get my foot in the door at Calora Finch Analytics. When I finally landed a junior analyst role, the starting salary was modest, but to me, it felt like a fortune because every single cent of it was mine. I moved into a 1-bedroom apartment on the edge of the city. It was small, with a radiator that clanked like a dying engine and a view of a brick wall. But it was the most beautiful place I had ever seen. I furnished it slowly, piece by piece, turning the process into a ritual of independence. The coffee table was a Craigslist find that I sanded down by hand on a Saturday night. The armchair was thrifted, smelling faintly of lavender and dust. I paid for the lamp, the rug, and the mismatched plates in full. With money I had earned, there were no strings attached to my toaster. There was no guilt trip hidden in the weave of my curtains. But the past has a way of reaching out, even when you think you have severed the limb. During my second tax season as a junior analyst, I decided to run a comprehensive credit check. I was planning to trade in my rusted sedan for something reliable, and I wanted to be prepared. I logged into the monitoring site, expecting to see a short, clean history of student loans and my one secured credit card. Instead, I saw a jagged red line. There was a credit card account I did not recognize. It had been opened 3 years prior, right around the time I turned 18, and maxed out almost immediately. The balance was sitting in collections, festering with interest and late fees. My stomach turned over. It was the rejected application from my teenage years. My father had not thrown it away. He had waited until my 18th birthday, corrected the date, forged my signature again, and opened the account without me ever knowing. He had bought his vacuum, and probably a television, and God knows what else, and then never paid a dime. I spent the next 6 months fighting a war with the bank and the credit bureaus. I filed affidavits of fraud. I spent hours on hold, listening to elevator music while suppressing the urge to scream. I had to prove that I had not lived at my parents' address when the charges were made. I had to threaten legal action. I cleared it, eventually, but the lesson was seared into my brain. Physical distance was not enough. As long as we shared a last name and a history, they could still reach into my pockets. It was around this time that I started eating lunch with Elena Morris. Elena was a compliance specialist at Calora Finch, a woman with sharp glasses and an even sharper wit. She noticed me eating a packed sandwich alone in the break room for 3 weeks straight and finally dragged me out for tacos. Over time, the professional small talk eroded, and I started sharing sanitized versions of my background, the funny stories about my parents' bad financial advice, leaving out the darker, more predatory details. But Elena was smart. She read between the lines. "You should talk to my sister," she said one afternoon, after I mentioned the credit card incident. "Maya is a family law attorney. She sees this kind of thing more often than you would think." I met Maya for drinks a week later. She was intimidatingly poised, but her eyes were kind. When I told her about the credit card and the constant demands for money, she didn't look shocked. She looked concerned. "Aubrey," Maya said, swirling the ice in her glass, "have you ever heard of filial responsibility laws?" I shook my head. Ohio, like several other states, has statutes on the books that can technically require adult children to support indigent parents, she explained. It is rarely enforced, and usually only involves medical bills or nursing homes. But if your parents are as manipulative as you say, they could try to make a case that you have a pattern of supporting them. They could try to claim you have an implied contract. The room felt suddenly cold. They can sue me for existing? It is unlikely to succeed, Maya said. But the threat is real, and the harassment is real. You need a shield. You need them to acknowledge, in writing, that you owe them nothing, that you are separate entities. The idea terrified me. My parents would never sign a document that cut off their supply line. They would scream. They would guilt. They would refuse. You don't ask them to sign a leave me alone contract, Maya said, a small, devious smile playing on her lips. You catch them when they are greedy. People don't read the fine print when they think they are getting what they want. The opportunity arrived 2 months later. Mark called me on a Tuesday, his voice sickeningly sweet. Their van had finally died. They had found a used sedan at a dealership, a great deal, but because of their unfair credit history, the bank required a cosigner. "We just need your signature, Aubrey," he said. "We will make the payments. We promise. We just need your good name to unlock the door." I knew, with 100% certainty, that if I co-signed that loan, I would be paying for that car until the wheels fell off. "Okay," I said. "Really?" Mark sounded shocked. "Yes, but I can't come to the dealership. I have meetings all day. Meet me at the Notary Public on 4th Street during my lunch break. Bring the papers. I will sign." I spent the morning drafting my own document. It was a formal declaration of financial independence and non-responsibility. It stated, in clear legal terms, that I, Aubrey Keene, held no liability for the debts of Linda and Mark Keene, past, present, or future. It stated that any previous support was a gift, not an admission of obligation, and most importantly, it contained a clause where they explicitly waived any right to claim support from me under any state statute or common law. I printed it on the same heavy, high-quality bond paper that loan documents use. When I walked into the notary office, they were already there, vibrating with impatience. Mark had a folder of papers from the dealership. "You are a lifesaver, Aubrey," Linda said, patting my arm. "Truly?" "Let's get this done," I said. "I only have 20 minutes." We went to the counter. The notary, a bored-looking woman named Janice, asked for our IDs. Mark spread the dealership papers out. "I need to sign these," I said, pointing to the loan application. "But the bank also requires this addendum because we live in different counties. It is just a standard liability waiver so the loan doesn't get tangled up with my student loans." I slid my document onto the counter, right on top of the stack. Mark glanced at it. He saw the dense paragraphs of legal jargon. He saw the spaces for signatures. He didn't read a single word. He just saw the car keys dangling in his imagination. "Bureaucracy, right?" Mark laughed, grabbing the pen. "Always more paper." "Always," I said. He signed. Linda signed. The notary stamped it with her heavy, satisfying seal. Then, I signed the dealership papers. But I didn't sign as a co-signer. I had noticed earlier that the form had a section for references that looked deceptively similar to the co-signer block if you weren't paying attention. I filled in my name and address as a reference, illegibly scribbled the rest, and handed it back. "Done," I said, slipping the notarized declaration into my purse. "That's my girl," Mark said, clapping me on the shoulder. "The money girl, always coming through." They left in a rush, eager to get their car. They wouldn't realize until they got to the dealership that I hadn't actually co-signed the loan. The dealership would reject them. They would call me screaming, and I would feign ignorance, saying I must have filled out the wrong line, claiming the bank must have changed the rules. But I would have the paper. I took the declaration home and locked it in a fireproof box in the back of my closet. I told myself it was just a precaution, a break glass in case of emergency tool. I hoped I would never have to use it. I hoped they would just stay in their lane and leave me in mine. I was wrong. Years passed. I climbed the ladder at Calora Finch. I worked late nights and early mornings. I became the person everyone relied on. And then, the promotion happened. The email hit my inbox at 9 in the morning. Senior data analyst, a salary of $112,000. I sat at my desk, stunned joy washing over me. Elena rolled her chair over, saw the screen, and squealed. "We are celebrating," she whispered. "Tonight, drinks, no excuses." I printed the compensation letter to sign it and bring it to HR. I sent the print job to the central copier in the hallway, the big one that the entire floor shared. But just as I hit send, my phone rang. It was a client with a data emergency. I got stuck on the call for 15 minutes. By the time I hung up and walked to the printer, the tray was empty. I looked around. A stack of papers was sitting on the side table, organized by a helpful intern who had cleared the tray. My letter was on the bottom of the stack. Face up. The bold text, 112,000, was staring up at the fluorescent lights. I snatched it up, my heart skipping a beat. I looked around the office. 2 assistants were chatting by the water cooler. A junior associate from the sales department was making coffee. It had been sitting there for 15 minutes. In an office, information travels faster than light, and I knew, with a sinking feeling in my gut, that the sales associate's cousin went to church with my mother's sister. I knew that the intern's mother played bingo with my aunt. Columbus was a big city, but the gossip vine was small, tight, and incredibly efficient. I walked back to my desk, the letter burning a hole in my hand. I should have been ecstatic. Instead, I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I checked my phone. No messages yet. But the clock was ticking. The number was out there, and I knew, just as sure as I knew the sun would set, that the calculator was already coming out. The envelope lay on the quartz countertop between us. a stark white rectangle against the gray veining of the stone. To my right, the plastic container holding the supermarket cake had begun to fog up from the inside, the condensation beating and sliding down the clear lid like nervous sweat. The vanilla frosting was starting to separate in the warmth of the apartment, weeping a thin, oily liquid onto the cardboard base. My parents were staring at the envelope, then at me, the air in the kitchen so thick with entitlement it felt hard to breathe. Linda clasped her hands together, resting them on the table in a pose that mimicked prayer, but felt more like a negotiation tactic. She leaned forward, the wooden legs of the bar stool screeching briefly against the floor. "Aubrey, honey," she began, her voice dropping into that confidential, sugary register she reserved for asking favors or gossiping about neighbors. "We know this is a lot to process. Big numbers are scary, but you have to understand how families work, real families. We pool resources. When one of us succeeds, we all succeed. It is not about taking, it is about sharing the load." She reached out and patted my hand. Her palm was damp. "You should feel honored," she continued, her eyes wide and unblinking. "Most children never get the chance to truly pay their parents back. You have been given a gift. Aubrey, the gift of being the one who can finally give back in a real way, the one who can fix this family." "Fix the family," I repeated, the words tasting like copper in my mouth. "Exactly," Mark cut in. He was less interested in the emotional manipulation and more interested in the bottom line. He tapped his phone screen, which was still glowing with the calculator app. "I have crunched the numbers. Aubrey, we are not asking for the moon. We are asking for fairness." He cleared his throat, sitting up straighter, assuming the posture of a man delivering a verdict. "We expect 50% of your monthly net income," he stated flatly. "Direct deposit. We can set it up tonight." The room seemed to tilt. 50%? "Don't look at me like that," Mark snapped, his patience fraying instantly at the first sign of resistance. "This isn't a loan, Aubrey. We are not going to write you an IOU. This is support. This is restitution. We carried you for 18 years. We fed you when we were hungry. We clothed you when we were wearing rags. Now it is your turn. If you love us, if you have a single shred of decency in your body, you will not make us beg for what is rightfully ours." My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. The old programming kicked in, the deep-seated reflex to justify my existence, to apologize for taking up space. My mouth opened, and the words rushed to the tip of my tongue. "I have rent," I wanted to say. "I have student loans that take $600 a month. I am saving for a house. I have a 401k. I have car insurance." I actually took a breath to say it. I started to form the syllable, I. Then I stopped. I looked at Mark's face, hard and expectant. I looked at Linda, watching me with a predator's focus. They did not care about my rent. They did not care if I lived in a cardboard box as long as the check cleared. If I told them my rent was $2,000, they would tell me to move somewhere cheaper. If I told them about my student loans, they would tell me to defer them. Any reason I gave was just an opening for a negotiation I was destined to lose. I closed my mouth. I swallowed the explanations. I let the silence stretch out, taut and heavy, until Mark shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it landed in the center of the room like a grenade. Linda blinked. "Excuse me?" "No," I said again, louder this time, finding my voice. "I will not be giving you 50% of my salary. I will not be giving you 10%. My finances are my own." The transformation in the room was instant. The sugary warmth vanished from Linda's face as if a switch had been flipped, replaced by a cold, sharp sneer that made her look 10 years older. "I knew it," she hissed, pulling her hand away from mine as if I had burned her. "I told your father. I told him. You have been brainwashed. It is those city people you work with, those selfish, godless corporate people who think money is more important than blood. You have forgotten who you are, Aubrey." "I haven't forgotten anything," I said. You have forgotten who kept a roof over your head, Linda shouted, her voice rising to a shriek. You have forgotten who wiped your nose and drove you to school and sacrificed their own dreams so you could sit in some fancy office and type on a computer. You ungrateful little brat. Mark stood up, looming over the kitchen island. He was using his physical size now, a tactic he had employed since I was a child. You listen to me, he growled. We are not leaving here without an agreement. You think you can just say no? You think you can just walk away? I am already away. Dad, this is my apartment. And you will have no one left in it when we are done with you, Mark threatened, pointing a thick finger at my face. If you turn your back on us, everyone is going to know. I will call your Aunt Sarah. I will call the pastor. I will tell the entire church council that our daughter, our successful, rich daughter, refuses to help her sick, struggling parents buy groceries. The threat hit a nerve. I felt a spike of adrenaline. The church community back home was small, insular, and judgmental. My parents had spent years cultivating an image of pious suffering. If they spun a story about me leaving them to starve, it would stick. I would be the villain in every sermon for the next decade. But then I looked at the envelope again. Go ahead, I said. Call them. Mark froze, his finger still in the air. What? Call the pastor, I said, my voice steadying. But before you do, you should probably read what is in the envelope. I reached out and picked up the sealed white packet. My hands were shaking slightly, but my movements were deliberate. I slid a fingernail under the flap. I had not glued it shut, just tucked it, and pulled out the single sheet of heavy bond paper. I unfolded it. The crease was sharp. I placed it gently on the table, facing them. Read it, I said. Read every word, slowly. Mark looked at the paper with disdain, as if it were a piece of junk mail. I don't have time for games, Aubrey. It is not a game, I said. Read it. Linda leaned in, squinting. Her eyes scanned the header. Declaration of Financial Independence and Non-Responsibility. I watched their eyes move. I saw the moment the confusion set in. They recognized the format. They recognized the font. This, Mark muttered, his brow furrowing, this looks like the car loan paperwork. Keep reading, I said. He scanned down the page. I saw his lips moving silently as he read the clauses. Parties agree that Aubrey Keene holds no financial liability for the debts, living expenses, or maintenance of Mark and Linda Keene. Undersigned explicitly waive any right to claim support, alimony, or maintenance from Aubrey Keene under Ohio Revised Code. Any past financial assistance is deemed a gift and does not establish a precedent of support. Mark stopped. He looked up at me, his face flushing a deep, blotchy red. What is this? He demanded, his voice shaking with a mix of rage and confusion. This is just legal jargon. This means nothing. Look at the bottom, I said, pointing to the signatures. There, in blue ink, was his signature, sloppy, hurried, arrogant, and beside it, Linda's, and below them, the raised, crimped seal of the notary public, dated 3 years ago. I didn't sign this, Linda cried out, recoiling from the paper. I never signed this. You tricked us. I didn't trick you, I said calmly. I told you exactly what it was. I told you it was a liability waiver so the bank wouldn't link my student loans to your car note. You were just too busy thinking about the new car to read it. You swapped the papers, Mark accused, slamming his hand on the counter. You little snake. You swapped the papers at the notary. I presented a document for you to sign, I said, my voice hard as flint. You signed it. You swore to it in front of an officer of the state. It is filed, it is legal, and it says, in your own handwriting, that I do not owe you a dime. Mark grabbed the paper, as if to tear it up. That is a copy. I lied smoothly. The original was in a safe deposit box at my bank, but they didn't need to know that. Tear it up if you want. It doesn't change the fact that it exists. He froze, his hand crumpling the edge of the page but stopping short of ripping it. Why? Linda whispered. looking at me with genuine horror. "Why would you do this? Why would you plan this?" "Because I know you," I said. "I know that you don't see me as a person. You see me as a retirement plan. I kept this document for 3 years, hoping I would never have to use it, hoping that just once, you would come to visit me without an invoice in your hand." I gestured to the cheap cake, the calculator app, the notepad. "But I was right," I said. "I protected myself from exactly this conversation." Linda pushed the paper away, her face twisting. "Paper means nothing when we are your parents. You can't sign away your blood. God sees what you are doing. Aubrey, God sees you dishonoring us." But her voice lacked its usual fire. It was shrill, desperate. I looked at Mark. He was still staring at his signature, his mouth slightly open. The bluster was draining out of him. For the first time in my life, looking at my father, I did not see a giant. I did not see a tyrant. I saw a man who had walked into a trap he helped build. He looked up at me, and I saw it, behind the anger, behind the greed. There was a flicker of something new. Fear. He was realized that the rules of the game had changed. He wasn't holding the leash anymore. I was holding the scissors. "Get out," I said quietly. "We are not done," Mark blustered, but he was already straightening up, pulling his jacket closed. He shoved his phone into his pocket. "We are done for tonight," I said. "Take the cake." Mark glared at me, a look of pure venom, but he stepped back. Linda grabbed her purse, shooting daggers at me with her eyes, but she stood up. They did not take the cake. They walked to the door, their footsteps heavy and angry. Mark paused with his hand on the knob, turning back to look at me one last time. "You think a piece of paper makes you safe?" he spat. "You will see, Aubrey. You will see what family really means." He slammed the door so hard the walls shook. I stood in the silence of the kitchen, the adrenaline finally crashing, leaving my knees weak. I looked down at the document on the table. It was just paper, ink, and wood pulp. But as I traced the seal with my thumb, I knew it was the strongest thing I owned. They were gone, but the fear in Mark's eyes told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't the end. It was just the opening shot of a war. The silence that followed the slamming of my apartment door was not peaceful. It was heavy, vibrating with the aftershocks of the confrontation. I stood in the hallway for a long time, staring at the deadbolt I had just thrown, listening to the blood rushing in my ears. The cheap cake my mother had brought sat on the counter like a biological hazard, the frosting sweating inside its plastic dome. I did not sleep that night. I sat on my couch with my knees pulled to my chest, replaying the scene over and over. I heard the crack in my father's voice when he realized he had been outmaneuvered. I saw the venom in my mother's eyes, but mostly, I thought about Mark's parting words. "You will see what family really means." It sounded like a threat. For 3 days, nothing happened. My phone did not ring. No angry texts flooded my inbox. The silence was unnerving, like the receding water before a tsunami. I went to work. I attended meetings. I built data models. But a part of my brain was constantly running a background process, waiting for the other shoe to drop. It dropped on a Thursday at 2 in the afternoon. I was at my desk at Lila Finch, cross-referencing a client's sales data, when my personal phone buzzed against the wood of the desk. It was a notification from the credit monitoring service I had subscribed to years ago, right after the first credit card incident. "New inquiry detected." My stomach turned over. I unlocked the phone and opened the app. The alert was bright red. Creditor, Quicksure Finance. Type, personal loan. Amount, $25,000. Status, pending. I stared at the screen. I had not applied for a loan. Quicksure Finance was one of those predatory lenders that advertised on daytime television, promising cash in 24 hours with interest rates that bordered on criminal. I stood up, grabbing my laptop and phone, and walked straight to a private huddle room. I dialed the number for Quicksure Finance immediately. The hold music was a tinny, distorted jazz loop that grated on my nerves. I paced the small room, my heels clicking on the carpet. Finally, a human voice answered. "Quick, Sure Finance. This is Brad. How can I help you?" "My name is Aubrey Keene," I said, my voice clipped and professional. "I just received an alert about a credit inquiry in my name. I did not apply for a loan." "Okay, Ms. Keene, let me pull up the file. One moment." Keyboard keys clacked in the background. "Ah, yes, we have an application here submitted this morning. $25,000 for debt consolidation." "I did not submit that," I repeated. "Who submitted it?" "It came in through our online portal," Brad said. "But it was flagged by our fraud algorithm because the IP address does not match your current address on file, and the employment verification number provided was a cell phone, not a corporate line." My heart was pounding, but my mind was icy cool. I was an analyst. I needed data. "What documentation was submitted with the application?" I asked. "Standard stuff," Brad replied, sounding bored. "Social security number, current pay stub, which looked a little blurry, honestly, and a photo of your driver's license." I stopped pacing. "A photo of my driver's license?" "Yes, ma'am, front and back, uploaded as a JPEG." I closed my eyes. I pictured my wallet. I kept my license in a clear plastic window inside my leather purse. I never took it out unless I was at the airport or a bar. Then I remembered. 6 months ago, Linda and Mark had visited for lunch. It was a rare, relatively peaceful visit. I had left my purse on the kitchen counter while I went to the bathroom. I had been gone for maybe 4 minutes. That was all it took. They hadn't just come for lunch. They had come to harvest data. While I was flushing the toilet, my mother or father had opened my wallet, taken out my license, placed it on the counter, and snapped a photo with their smartphone. Then they had put it back, zipped the purse, and sat down to eat sandwiches as if they hadn't just committed a felony against their own daughter. "Ms. Keene?" Brad asked. "Are you still there?" "Yes," I said. "Brad, listen to me very carefully. That application is fraudulent. I am the victim of identity theft. I need you to cancel that application immediately, flag the account, and send me a copy of everything that was uploaded, the IP address, the phone numbers used, the images, everything." "I can cancel it," Brad said, his voice losing its boredom and gaining a note of caution. "But for the records, you will need to file a police report and send us a subpoena." "You will get it," I promised. I hung up. I did not scream. I did not cry. I sat in the huddle room and let the realization wash over me. This was not just entitlement anymore. This was not just family helping family. This was a calculated crime. They had stolen my identity. They had waited until they knew I had the salary to support a loan. And then they had struck. The demand for 50% of my income had been Plan A. When I said no, they didn't hesitate. They moved to Plan B, taking it by force, using my name. I left the office early. I drove straight to Maya's office. Maya listened to me without interrupting, her pen tapping a steady rhythm on her legal pad. When I finished explaining the call with Brad, she set the pen down. "This changes the landscape, Aubrey," Maya said. Her voice was grave. "Before, we were dealing with emotional coercion and potential civil claims for support. Now, we are looking at criminal fraud, identity theft, forgery." "They are my parents," I said, the words feeling strange in my mouth. "I don't want to put them in prison. I just want them to stop." "They won't stop," Maya said. "People who photograph their daughter's ID while she's in the bathroom do not stop because you ask them nicely. They stop when they hit a wall, a concrete, legal wall." She pulled a fresh file folder from her drawer. "We need to secure your perimeter," she said. "We freeze everything, Experian, TransUnion, Equifax, check systems. No one opens a lemonade stand in your name without a PIN code. Only you know. But we also need to strengthen your evidence. You have the first declaration, which is good. But we need to tie this specific action to them." "How?" Maya leaned forward. "You are going to meet them. You are going to tell them that you are reconsidering their request for help, but that there is some paperwork confusion that needs to be cleared up. You are going to get them to sign a second affidavit. They won't sign anything else, I said. Mark was suspicious of the first one. They are desperate, Maya countered. And they are greedy. If they think signing a paper is the key to unlocking your bank account, they will sign it. And this document will be specific. It will state that they have never had access to your identification documents, that they have never applied for credit in your name, and that they understand doing so is a felony. When they sign that, they are either lying under oath, which is perjury, or they are admitting to the fraud if we catch them later. I understood. It was a trap, a paper snare. I texted Mark that evening. I have been thinking, maybe we can work something out. But my bank is flagging some things because of the old car loan paperwork. We need to update the file if I'm going to be able to transfer any funds. Can you meet me at the diner on 3rd Street tomorrow? The reply came 2 minutes later. We knew you would come to your senses. We will be there at noon. The diner was a neutral ground, smelling of burnt coffee and maple syrup. I arrived 10 minutes early and chose a booth near the window. I ordered a black coffee and waited. They walked in at 12 o'clock sharp. Mark looked triumphant. His chest puffed out. Linda looked smug, clutching her purse like a queen holding a scepter. They slid into the booth opposite me. Well, Mark said, picking up the menu, I am glad you decided to stop being stubborn. Family fights. But in the end, blood wins out. I am not here to fight, I said quietly. I am here to fix the administrative issues. Administrative issues, Linda scoffed. You and your corporate words. Just write the check, Aubrey. I can't write a check until the bank clears the restriction. I lied. Because of the identity theft issues I had years ago, my accounts are locked down tight. The bank needs a sworn statement from my immediate family confirming that we are separate financial entities and that you have no authorization to use my credit. It is a compliance thing. I placed the folder on the table. Inside was the document Maya had drafted. It was dense, filled with clauses about the unauthorized use of personal identification and strict adherence to financial separation. Mark looked at it suspiciously. More paper? I told you, Aubrey. I am tired of signing things. If you don't sign it, the bank won't lift the freeze, I said, shrugging. And if the freeze isn't lifted, I can't send you any money. It is up to you. I watched the greed war with the paranoia in his eyes. He wanted the money. He wanted the 50%. He had already tried to steal $25,000 behind my back and failed. He probably thought this was his way to get access legitimately. Fine, Mark grunted. He grabbed the pen I offered. He didn't read it. He didn't read the paragraph where he affirmed under penalty of perjury that he had never possessed or utilized my driver's license for any purpose. He didn't read the section where he acknowledged that any future attempt to use my identity would be considered a willful and malicious act. He just signed. Linda signed next, complaining about the small print, her eyes darting to the dessert menu. There, Mark said, shoving the folder back to me. Now, when do we get the transfer? The bank says it takes 48 to 72 hours to process the compliance update, I said, closing the folder and slipping it into my bag. 72 hours, Linda whined. We have bills due on Monday. I am doing my best, I said. I have to get back to work. I stood up. I didn't touch my coffee. You are a good girl, Aubrey, Mark said, his voice dripping with false praise. I knew you would step up. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had photographed my license while I was in the bathroom, the man who had tried to shackle me to a high-interest loan without a second thought. Goodbye, Dad, I said. I walked out of the diner. The air outside was crisp and cold, biting at my cheeks. I clutched the bag to my side. I now had 2 documents, 2 locks on the door. But as I walked toward my car, I didn't feel safe. I felt a deep, hollow ache in the center of my chest. I had just tricked my parents into signing their own legal death warrants. I had to treat my own family like hostile corporate raiders just to survive. They were going to wait 72 hours, and when the money didn't come, when they realized I had blocked them again, and this time I had the evidence to put them in jail, the explosion would not be a yelling match in my kitchen. It would be nuclear. I unlocked my car and sat in the driver's seat, staring at the gray sky. I had won the skirmish, but looking at the darkening clouds, I knew the real storm was just beginning. They would not take this lying down. They would come for me with everything they had, and I had to be ready to burn it all down. The silence that followed our meeting at the diner lasted exactly 3 weeks. It was a strange, suffocating kind of quiet. I went to work every day, checked my credit reports every morning, and waited. I expected screaming voicemails. I expected them to show up at my office building and cause a scene in the lobby. I expected slashed tires or a brick through my window. I did not expect the mailman. He arrived on a Tuesday, whistling a tune, and slid a single, thick envelope into my mailbox. It was not from a bank. It was not from a credit card company. The return address was the County Court of Common Pleas, Domestic Relations Division. My name was handwritten on the front, but it was misspelled. Aubrey Keene. They had missed the E, a detail that seemed trivial, but somehow made my stomach churn with a mixture of nausea and familiarity. Even when dragging me into the legal system, they could not be bothered to pay attention to the details of who I was. I took the envelope upstairs and sat at my kitchen island. I used a letter opener to slice the top, my hands trembling just enough to make the paper jag. I pulled out a stack of documents. The cover sheet was a petition for support of indigent parents. I read the first paragraph, and the air left my lungs. According to the petition, Linda and Mark Keene were filing under a little-known state statute that required adult children to provide financial maintenance for parents who were unable to support themselves due to age, infirmity, or destitution. They were suing me for a monthly stipend of $3,000. I flipped the page. Attached to the petition was an affidavit of financial hardship. It was a work of fiction so elaborate it almost commanded respect. Exhibit A was a series of bank statements. They were printed on standard paper, but the formatting looked slightly off. The font a little too crisp. The balances listed were pitiful. Checking account, $42. Savings account, $12. I stared at the numbers. I knew for a fact that my father had cashed a disability settlement check for $8,000 just 4 months ago. I knew my mother had a secret stash of cash she kept in a hollowed-out Bible, but according to this paper, they were destitute. Exhibit B was a list of medical conditions. My father, a man who played 18 holes of golf whenever he could afford the green fees, was listed as suffering from debilitating chronic back pain that rendered him unable to stand for more than 10 minutes. My mother, whose lungs were only damaged by the 2 packs of cigarettes she smoked a day, claimed to have severe, undiagnosed respiratory failure that required constant care. But it was Exhibit C that made me drop the papers onto the counter. It was a series of photocopied screenshots of text messages. The contact name at the top of the screenshots read, Aubrey, daughter. Message 1. Mom, I know you guys are struggling. I promise I will start sending the checks next month. I am just waiting for my bonus. Message 2. I feel so bad about how much I owe you. You guys did everything for me. I will make it right. $3,000 a month is fair. Message 3. Don't worry about the rent. I will cover it. Love you. I stared at the grainy gray images. I had never written those texts. I had never sent those messages. I looked closer. The timestamp on the messages was from 2 weeks ago, right after I had discovered the identity theft attempt, but it was the phone number at the top of the screen that gave it away. My number ended in 54. The number in the screenshot ended in 55. It was 1 digit off. Someone, my father, undoubtedly, had purchased a prepaid burner phone, saved the number in his own contacts as Aubrey, daughter, and then spent an afternoon texting himself back and forth to create a paper trail of my guilt. And the syntax was wrong. I was a data analyst. I wrote incomplete sentences. I used punctuation. I did not use you for you. I did not say struggling when I meant insolvent. They had tried to mimic my voice, but they had only managed to sound like themselves. I felt a cold, hard knot form in my chest. This wasn't just a shakedown anymore. This was perjury. This was fraud upon the court. I turned to the section on assets. The petition required them to list all real estate and property. In the box marked a real property, they had written none. In the box marked vehicles, they had listed only the rusted sedan they had tricked me into helping them buy years ago. None. I closed my eyes and pictured the small, beige duplex in the neighboring town of Kettering. My parents had bought it at a foreclosure auction 10 years ago, using an inheritance my mother received from a great-aunt. They rented it out to a nice young couple for $1,200 a month. They never declared the income on their taxes, and they certainly weren't declaring the asset here. And the camper van, the 20-foot Winnebago they had bought 2 summers ago for weekend getaways. They parked it behind a friend's barn to avoid storage fees. It was worth at least $15,000. They were lying about everything. They were walking into a court of law and lying to a judge, gambling on the fact that I would be too scared, too ashamed, or too guilty to call them out. They were betting on the daughter they thought they raised, the one who was afraid of conflict, the one who just wanted to be good. They did not realize that daughter had left the building a long time ago. I gathered the papers, grabbed my car keys, and drove straight to Maya's office. I didn't even call ahead. When I laid the petition on Maya's desk, she picked it up with 2 fingers, as if it were contaminated. She read the text messages first. A slow, terrifying smile spread across her face. "They filed this?" she asked. "They actually filed this with the clerk?" "Yes," I said. "Whatever lawyer they found, probably some strip mall guy my dad knows from the bar, must not have vetted any of it." "Aubrey," Maya said, leaning back in her chair, "this is a gift, a horrible, stressful gift, but a gift nonetheless." "It feels like a nightmare," I said, rubbing my temples. "They are suing me for $3,000 a month. They are saying I promised to pay them. They are committing fraud," Maya corrected me. "Submitting fabricated evidence to a court is a felony. Lying on a financial affidavit regarding assets is perjury. They have handed us the hammer, and they have placed their own heads on the anvil." She opened her laptop and started typing furiously. "We are not just going to defend this," Maya said, her eyes scanning the screen. "We are going to countersue. We are going to expose the hidden assets. We are going to subpoena the phone records for that number ending in 55 to prove it is a burner phone activated in their name, and we are going to present the 2 notarized declarations you have." "The declarations," I whispered. I had almost forgotten them in the shock of the fake texts. "Exactly," Maya said. "They signed a legal document stating you have no financial obligation to them. Then they signed another one stating they understand they are separate entities. And now they file a petition claiming you promised to pay them? It proves bad faith. It proves they are predators." She looked at me, her expression softening. "But we need more than paper. Aubrey, we need character evidence. The judge is going to see 2 sick, old people crying about their ungrateful rich daughter. We need someone who can puncture that narrative. Someone who knows the truth about how they treated you." I looked down at my hands. "I don't have anyone. My aunts and uncles all believe Linda's stories. The church is on their side." "Think," Maya urged. "Is there anyone left? Anyone who saw the dynamic? A teacher? A neighbor? A relative they haven't poisoned against you?" My mind raced back through the years, the isolation, the closed doors. They had been so careful to keep our dysfunction private. Then, a face popped into my mind. Sharp blue eyes, a cane with a silver handle, the smell of peppermint and old books. "Ruth," I said. "Who is Ruth?" "My grandmother," I said. "My father's mother. She moved to a senior living community in Dayton 3 years ago because she couldn't stand living near them anymore. Mark tried to borrow money from her pension once too often, and she cut him off." Maya stopped typing. "Is she lucid?" "Sharp as a tack," I said. "She does the Sunday crossword in pen." "Call her," Maya said. "Tonight?" I left Maya's office feeling a strange mix of resolve and nausea. The legal path was clear, but the emotional path was a minefield. I was about to drag my parents, the people who gave me life, through the mud in a public courtroom. I was going to prove they were liars and thieves. I felt dirty. I felt like I was betraying a fundamental law of nature. I met Elena for a drink after leaving the law firm. I sat in the booth, staring into my glass of wine, picking at the label on the bottle. I feel like a monster, I admitted. They are going to lose everything if I do this. If I prove the fraud, they could go to jail, or at least lose the duplex. Elena reached across the table and grabbed my wrist. Her grip was tight. "Aubrey, look at me," she commanded. I looked up. Her eyes were fierce behind her glasses. "You are not ruining your family," Elena said, pronouncing each word with absolute clarity. "You are refusing to be ruined by them. There is a difference. They threw the grenade. You are just throwing it back before it blows up your life." "But they are my parents," I whispered. "Biology is an accident," Elena said. "Behavior is a choice. They chose to steal your identity. They chose to forge texts. They chose to sue you. You are just choosing to tell the truth." She was right. I knew she was right. But knowing it and feeling it were two different things. I went home and dialed the number for the Sunnybrook Senior Community. It rang 4 times before a crisp, familiar voice answered. "This is Ruth Mercer." "Grandma?" I said. "It is Aubrey." There was a pause. Then, the warmth flooded through the line. "Aubrey, my goodness, it has been months. Are you all right? You sound like you are underwater." "I am not all right, Grandma," I said, my voice cracking. "I am in trouble. Well, not trouble, exactly, but Mark and Linda, they have done something." "What have they done now?" Ruth asked. Her tone was not surprised. It was resigned. I told her everything. I told her about the promotion, the demand for 50%, the identity theft, the lawsuit, the fake texts. When I got to the part about the fake texts, Ruth let out a sound that was half laugh, half scoff. "Amateurs," she muttered. "They were always sloppy." "Grandma," I said, taking a deep breath, "I have to go to court. I have to fight this petition. My lawyer says I need someone to testify, someone who knows that they aren't destitute, someone who knows that I was the one paying the bills when I was 16. The line went silent. I held my breath. I was asking an 80-year-old woman to testify against her own son. It was too much. It was cruel. "I understand if you can't," I started to say. "I know he is your son and—" "Aubrey?" Ruth interrupted me. Her voice was strong, vibrating with a steeliness I recognized. It was the same steeliness I felt in my own spine when I stood my ground. "My son lost his way 30 years ago," Ruth said. "I have watched him and that woman bleed you dry since you were a little girl. I stayed quiet because I thought I was keeping the peace. But there is no peace with people like that, only appetite." She paused, and I could hear the rustle of fabric, as if she was straightening her dress. "I have my diaries," she said. "I have written down every time Mark asked me for money, every time he bragged about how he made you pay the electric bill. I have dates. I have amounts." Tears pricked my eyes. "You do?" "It is time someone writes this story down properly," Ruth said. "Even if it is in a judge's notes, you tell your lawyer to send a car for me. I will be there." "Thank you," I whispered. "Thank you, Grandma." "Don't thank me," she said briskly. "Just promise me one thing. When we walk into that courtroom, you don't look down. You look them in the eye. You let them see that the bank is closed." "I promise," I said. I hung up the phone and walked to the window. The city lights of Columbus were spread out below me, a grid of gold and white. I was terrified. I was heartbroken. But for the first time since the envelope arrived, I did not feel alone. I had the paperwork, I had the truth, and now, I had the witness. The storm was here, but I wasn't just standing on the edge anymore. I was ready to walk into the center of it. The subpoena was a physical weight, but the digital assault was a vapor that seeped into every crack of my life. 10 days before the hearing, my phone lit up with a notification from Facebook. I had not been active on the platform in years, keeping my profile locked down and dormant, but the algorithm has a way of finding you. A high school acquaintance I had not spoken to since graduation sent me a screenshot. "Linda Keene is feeling heartbroken. Please pray for Mark and me. We never thought we would be in this position. We gave everything to raise our daughter, sacrificed our own health and retirement so she could have a better life. Now that she is a big shot in the city, she has forgotten the parents who kept a roof over her head. We are sick. We are struggling to buy medicine, and she won't even return our calls. It breaks a mother's heart to see her child taken over by greed. Matthew 5:42. The post had 142 likes. There were dozens of comments. Praying for you. Linda. Kids these days have no respect. That is shameful. After all you did for her? I scrolled through the comments, feeling a nausea that was distinct from the fear of the lawsuit. This was shame. Hot, prickly, public shame. I saw my Aunt Sarah, my mother's sister, commenting with a row of crying emojis. I saw the youth pastor from the church I attended as a teenager writing that he would pray for Aubrey's heart to soften. They were spinning a narrative where I was the villainous, cold-hearted corporate climbers and they were the martyrs. I learned later from an old neighbor that they were not just fishing for likes, they were fishing for cash. They had set up a small donation jar at the church potluck for the Keene Medical Fund. They were pocketing $20 bills from pensioners while suing me for thousands. My phone began to vibrate with a frequency that made me want to throw it out the window. Extended family members, people who had not called me on my birthday in a decade, suddenly felt entitled to an opinion on my finances. A voicemail from my uncle. Aubrey, it is Uncle Jerry. I saw your mom's post. Look, is it really that hard to send them a few dollars? You are making the whole family look bad. A text from a cousin. I heard you are letting them starve. Nice. The pressure was hydraulic. It pressed in from all sides, relentless and suffocating. The lawsuit I could fight with logic and evidence. But this was fighting a ghost. I could not subpoena a rumor. I could not cross-examine a Facebook status. For 3 nights, I did not sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The whispers of the town I fled echoing in my head. Ungrateful, greedy, bad daughter. By Friday, I broke. I sat at my kitchen table, my head in my hands. The fight felt too big. The cost of winning, the absolute destruction of my parents' reputation, the public airing of our dirty laundry, the permanent severance of my bloodline, felt too high. I pulled out my checkbook. I could offer them a settlement, $500 a month, maybe $800, enough to make them drop the lawsuit and delete the Facebook posts, enough to buy silence. It would be extortion. Yes, it would be rewarding their behavior. Yes, but it would be over. I could go back to being anonymous. I could stop the bleeding. I got into my car and drove. I did not call ahead. I needed to look them in the eye when I made the offer. I needed to see if there was any humanity left in them that would accept a truce. The drive to Dayton took an hour. When I pulled into the gravel driveway of the rental house, the sedan was gone. The house was dark. They were likely out spending the donation money they had grifted from the church, or perhaps meeting with their lawyer to invent more lies. I sat in the driveway, the engine idling. I should have turned around, but a morbid curiosity pulled at me. I still had my key on my ring, a relic I had never bothered to remove. I walked up the porch steps, the wood rotting under my boots, and unlocked the door. The smell hit me first, stale smoke, dust, and the cloying scent of cheap vanilla air freshener trying to mask the decay. The living room was a shrine to their stagnation. The same piles of magazines, the same yellowed curtains. I walked down the hall to my old bedroom. I wanted to stand in the space where I used to dream of escaping, to see if I could find the resolve to end this peacefully. I pushed the door open. My room was gone. It was not just that they had changed the furniture, it was a storage unit, floor-to-ceiling boxes, broken lamps, bags of old clothes, and a treadmill that looked like it had never been used. My bed was gone. My desk, where I had studied for the SATs until my eyes burned, was gone. There was not a single trace that I had ever lived there. I felt a hollow ache in my chest. They had erased me to make room for their hoarding. I turned to leave, but my foot caught on a cardboard box near the door. The flap fell open. Inside, I saw a flash of familiar handwriting. I knelt down. It was a box of my old things. Tossed haphazardly together with tax documents and old newspapers, I pulled out a spiral-bound notebook. The cover was peeling. It was my ledger from when I was 16. I opened it. The pages were filled with my teenage handwriting, neat and meticulous. October 14th, wages, $140. Gave to Mom for groceries, $100. Kept for gas, $40. November 1st, wages, $152. Dad needed for cable bill, $152. Balance, $0. I flipped through the pages, month after month, year after year, a detailed accounting of every hour I worked, every dollar I earned, and every cent they took. I saw the receipts I had stapled to the pages. Western Union transfers. Utility bill stubs stamped paid. I found a loose piece of notebook paper tucked into the back. It was a list of family goals my father had written when I was a senior in high school. Item number 4 was circled. Aubrey College. Loans. She will pay us back times 10 when she gets a real job. Times 10. I stared at the words. He had written it down. It was not a joke. It was not a vague expectation. It was a business plan. They had not raised a child. They had raised an investment vehicle. They had calculated the return on investment before I had even left the house. The guilt that had been crushing me for days evaporated. The shame that the Facebook comments had instilled in me turned into ash. I was not the ungrateful daughter. I was the venture capital they were trying to liquidate. I stood up, clutching the notebook. I dug deeper into the box and found more. The rejection letter for the credit card he tried to open when I was 17. A stack of pay stubs from the grocery store. I did not leave a note. I did not wait for them to come home. I picked up the entire box, heavy with the paper trail of my stolen childhood, and walked out of the house. I put the box in the passenger seat of my car. It sat there like a passenger, silent and accusing. My phone rang as I was merging onto the highway. It was Ruth. I heard the gossip at the bingo hall, Ruth said, her voice cutting through the static. People are saying you were seen at the house. They are saying you went to apologize. I went to offer them money, I admitted, my voice hard. I was going to settle, Grandma. I just wanted it to stop. And? Ruth asked. She did not scold me. She waited. And then I found the box, I said. I found the ledger. Grandma, Dad wrote that I would pay them back times 10. He wrote it down. Ruth let out a sharp breath. I told you. They have no bottom. Aubrey, there is no amount of money you can throw into that hole that will fill it up. If you give them $500 now, they will want $1,000 next year. If you settle, you are teaching them that terror works. I know, I said. I looked at the box next to me. I am keeping the box. Good, Ruth said. Bring it to court. But listen to me. Girl, the guilt you are feeling, that is not yours. That is a programmed response. They installed that button in you when you were 3 years old so they could press it whenever they needed cash. You have to disconnect the wiring. They are destroying my name, I said. The things they are saying online. Let them talk, Ruth said fiercely. Lions do not lose sleep over the opinions of sheep, and you are a lion, Aubrey. You survived them. That makes you the strongest thing in that courtroom. If you fold now, they will never stop. This is the only language they understand. The gavel, the order, the lock on the door. I am not folding, I said. The uncertainty was gone. I am going to burn the ledger, but not before the judge sees it. That is my girl, Ruth said. I hung up. The highway stretched out before me, leading back to Columbus, back to my life, back to the fortress I had built. I drove past the exit for the bank. I did not stop to get a cashier's check. I did not stop to withdraw cash. I went home. I carried the box upstairs. I placed it on my dining table next to the legal filings and the notarized declarations. I opened my laptop and logged into Facebook. I did not comment on Linda's post. I did not defend myself. I took a screenshot of her lies, printed it out, and added it to the evidence pile. Then I deactivated my account again. I was done explaining myself. I was done trying to manage their emotions. I was done paying for the crime of being their daughter. They wanted a day in court. They wanted a judgment. I would give them one. The mirror in my hallway was the first witness I faced that morning. I had spent 20 minutes debating what to wear, staring at my closet as if it were an armory. I finally chose a navy blue blazer, tailored and sharp, worn over a crisp white blouse and slate gray trousers. It was not an outfit designed to intimidate. It was not flashy or expensive looking. It was simply professional. It was the uniform of the woman I had become, competent, self-sufficient, and precise. I smoothed the lapel, watching my own hands in the reflection. They were steady. I needed them to be steady. I was not walking into that courtroom as Aubrey, the frightened daughter who hid in her room while her parents argued about bills. I was walking in as Aubrey Keene, senior data analyst, a woman who dealt in facts, not feelings. The drive to the courthouse was a blur of gray highway and low clouds. Elena drove, her hands tight on the wheel, while I sat in the passenger seat, clutching a file folder so hard my knuckles turned white. Maya met us at the entrance, her expression calm and unreadable, the way a surgeon looks before scrubbing in. The domestic relations court smelled of lemon floor wax and stale anxiety. The fluorescent lights hummed with a low, headache-inducing frequency. We walked down the wide corridor, our heels clicking on the terrazzo floor, a rhythm of approaching battle. I saw them before we even entered the courtroom. Linda and Mark were sitting on a wooden bench outside the doors. When I saw them, I almost stopped walking. They were in costume. My father, a man who owned 3 different leather jackets and a collection of flashy watches, was wearing a faded, ill-fitting brown suit that I recognized from a thrift store run 10 years ago. It hung off his shoulders, making him look smaller, frailer. He was not wearing a watch. My mother was worse. She was wearing a cardigan that had seen better days, the wool pilling at the elbows, and a skirt that looked deliberately dated. She held a crumpled tissue in her hand, twisting it around her fingers. She wore no makeup, highlighting the pallor of her skin. They looked destitute. They looked like the victims of a cruel system and an even crueler child. It was a visual lie so calculated that it took my breath away. Linda did not look at me. She kept her eyes fixed on the floor. Her shoulders hunched, playing the part of the heartbroken mother to perfection. Mark, however, looked up. His jaw was set so tight I could see the muscle jumping in his cheek. He stared at me with a cold, flat aggression, his eyes tracking me as I walked past. There was no love in that look. There was only the assessment of an enemy. We entered the courtroom. It was smaller than I expected, intimate in a way that felt dangerous. The wood paneling was dark, absorbing the light. I took my seat at the plaintiff's table, technically the respondent's table in this twisted narrative. I placed my hands flat on the cool wood. It felt solid, real. I focused on the grain of the oak, counting the lines. 1, 2, 3, grounding myself. I looked behind me. In the second row of the gallery, sitting perfectly upright, was Ruth. She was wearing her Sunday best, a dark purple dress with a high collar. Her silver cane rested against her leg. She did not smile at me. She simply nodded, a single, sharp dip of her chin. Her eyes were clear and fierce, cutting through the heavy atmosphere of the room. She was the only person in the building who knew the entire truth of where I came from, and her presence was a steel beam in my spine. "All rise," the bailiff announced, his voice bored and booming. The door behind the bench opened, and Judge Holloway entered. He was an older man with wire-rimmed glasses and a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite. He did not look kind, and he did not look mean. He looked tired of nonsense. He sat down, the rustle of his robe the only sound in the room. "Case number 472, he read, peering over his glasses. Keene versus Keene. Petition for support. Linda's attorney stood up. He was a man I vaguely recognized from town. Mr. Henderson. He wore a suit that was slightly too shiny and a tie that was too bright. He looked like a man who chased ambulances but settled for family disputes. "Your Honor," Henderson began, his voice dropping into a practiced, somber register. "We are here today on a matter of grave necessity. My clients, Mark and Linda Keene, are good people. They are humble people. They have worked hard their entire lives, breaking their backs to raise a daughter, to give her opportunities they never had." He gestured toward me, his hand sweeping through the air as if accusing me of murder. But now, in their twilight years, as illness and poverty strike, they find themselves abandoned. They are drowning in medical bills. They are struggling to put food on the table. And their daughter, who earns a salary in the top 10% of this state, has turned her back. She has closed her door. She has closed her heart. I stared straight ahead, keeping my face blank. Twilight years. They were in their mid-50s. Illness. They smoked and refused to exercise. Poverty. They owned a rental property. Henderson called Linda to the stand first. My mother walked to the witness box slowly, leaning heavily on the railing as if every step were agony. She sat down and pulled the microphone closer, her hand trembling. "Mrs. Keene," Henderson asked gently, "can you tell the court about your relationship with your daughter?" Linda sniffed. She dabbed at her dry eyes with the tissue. "We were so close," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I loved her more than my own life. We gave her everything, piano lessons, tutors, the best clothes. We went without so she could have—" I felt a flash of heat in my chest. Piano lessons? I had taught myself to play on a broken keyboard I found in a dumpster. Tutors? I was the one who tutored neighborhood kids to pay for my own school supplies. "And when did things change?" Henderson asked. "When she left," Linda said, looking at me for the first time with sad, wet eyes. "She left at 19, just packed a bag and walked out, never looked back. It was like we didn't exist anymore. She got those big fancy jobs in the city, and suddenly we weren't good enough." "Did you ask her for help?" "We never asked for much," Linda sobbed, the tears finally flowing. "We pride ourselves on being independent, but when Mark's back gave out and the heating bill went up, we just needed a little help, just a little, and she told us we were dead to her." She buried her face in the tissue. The performance was flawless. If I didn't know her, if I hadn't watched her practice these exact expressions in the mirror before parent-teacher conferences to get out of paying fees, I would have believed her. Mark was next. He sat in the chair, looking at his hands, playing the role of the stoic, broken patriarch. "Mr. Keene," Henderson said, "what is your current financial situation?" "Dire," Mark said, his voice gravelly. "We drained our savings to keep Aubrey in college. We took out loans. We thought it was an investment in the family. We thought she would help us when we got old." "And now?" "Now we are one step away from living in our car," Mark said. He looked up at the judge, his eyes wide and earnest. "We don't want to be a burden, Your Honor. We really don't, but we have nowhere else to turn. We are asking for $3,000 a month, just enough to survive." I waited for him to mention the duplex in Kettering. I waited for him to mention the camper van worth $15,000. I waited for him to mention the $8,000 settlement check he had cashed in June. He said nothing. He painted a picture of a cardboard box life, erasing every asset, every hidden account, every dollar they had squandered. Judge Holloway listened. He did not nod. He did not frown. He took notes with a fountain pen. The scratching sound loud in the quiet room. Occasionally, he would look up and study Mark's face, his expression unreadable. I watched my parents, and for the first time, I didn't feel fear. I felt a strange, cold detachment. It was like watching a play I had seen 100 times. I knew the lines. I knew the blocking. I knew exactly where the climax was supposed to be. Henderson stood up again, looking triumphant. "Your Honor," he said, walking to the plaintiff's table and picking up a stack of papers, "to prove that this request is not out of the blue, to prove that the respondent acknowledged her duty to her parents, we would like to submit Exhibit A." My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. "These are screenshots of text messages between the petitioners and their daughter. dated from last month, Henderson announced. In these messages, Aubrey Keene explicitly promises to send monthly support. She admits that she owes them. She admits that $3,000 is fair. He walked the papers up to the bailiff, who handed them to the judge. She promised, Your Honor, Henderson said, his voice rising with righteous indignation. And then she reneged. She gave them hope, and then she snatched it away. The courtroom went silent. I watched Judge Holloway. He put on his reading glasses. He picked up the packet of screenshots. He held them under the light. He read the first page. He flipped to the second page. He paused. I saw his eyes narrow slightly. He tilted the page, looking at the header, at the phone number listed at the top. Then, he did something that made the air in the room shift. He raised a single bushy gray eyebrow. He lowered the papers slowly and looked over the rim of his glasses at Henderson. Then he looked at Mark. It was not a look of sympathy. It was the look of a man who had just found a fly in his soup. Beside me, Maya let out a breath. It was soft, almost inaudible, but it sounded like a laugh. Interesting, Maya whispered, just loud enough for me to hear. She didn't need to say anything else. I knew. The judge had seen it. The tide was not just turning, it was about to crash down on their heads. I sat back in my chair, my hands still flat on the cool wood table, and waited for my turn to speak. The theater was over. The reality was about to begin. Maya stood up slowly, smoothing the front of her charcoal suit. She did not pace. She did not raise her voice. She simply walked to the podium with a single sheet of paper in her hand, the movement as precise as a blade sliding out of a sheath. Ms. Keene, Maya said, looking at me where I sat in the witness box. Please state your current cell phone number for the record. I leaned into the microphone. 614-555-0154. Maya nodded. She picked up the packet of screenshots that Linda's attorney, Mr. Henderson, had just presented as the smoking gun. And yet, Maya said, holding the paper up to the light, the sender of these messages, the person identified as Aubrey Daughter, has a phone number listed at the top of the screen that ends in 0155. She let the number hang in the air. 55, not 54. Ms. Keene, did you send these messages? No, I said clearly. I did not. Do you use the spelling you for you in your professional or personal correspondence? Never. Do you use the phrase struggling to describe insolvency? No, I use the word insolvent. Maya turned to the judge. Your Honor, we subpoenaed the subscriber records for the phone number ending in 55. The records, provided by TracFone Wireless, show that this number belongs to a prepaid device purchased at a Walmart in Dayton, Ohio, exactly 3 months ago. She handed a new document to the bailiff. The subscriber listed on the account, Maya continued, her voice hardening, is Linda Keene. A ripple of sound went through the courtroom. I saw Mark stiffen in his seat. Linda's hand flew to her mouth, the tissue forgotten. So, Maya said, turning back to the gallery, the petitioners purchased a burner phone, saved the number under their daughter's name, and texted themselves promises of money. That is not evidence, Your Honor. That is fabrication. Henderson was on his feet, objecting weakly, but the judge waved him down with a hand that looked like a stone tablet. Judge Holloway was not looking at Henderson. He was looking at Mark and Linda, his eyes cold and flat. Proceed, the judge said. Maya returned to her table and picked up a heavy stack of stapled documents. The petitioners claim to be destitute, Maya said. They claim to have 0 assets and 0 savings. They claim they are 1 step away from living in their car. She walked to the projector that had been set up in the center of the room. She placed a document on the glass. It was a property deed. This is a deed for a residential duplex located at 442 Elm Street in Kettering, Ohio, Maya said. It lists the owners as Mark and Linda Keene. The property was purchased 10 years ago. It is currently assessed at $180,000. It is mortgage-free. She swapped the deed for a bank statement. And these, she continued, pointing to a highlighted column, Our monthly deposits of $1,200 labeled Rent Elmest. The most recent deposit was 3 days ago. I watched my parents. Mark was staring at the table, his face a mask of red fury. Linda was whispering frantically to Henderson, who looked like he wanted to dissolve into the floor. They had lied on a sworn financial affidavit. In the legal world, that was not a mistake. It was a death sentence for your credibility. We also found it interesting, Maya said, her tone dripping with ice, that while the petitioners claim they cannot afford medication, the bank statements from their hidden account show withdrawals at the Hollywood Casino in Columbus totaling $4,000 in the last 6 months, and charges at QVC and Home Shopping Network totaling another $3,000. She looked at Mark. That is a lot of money for people who are supposedly starving. The silence in the room was absolute. The narrative of the frail, abandoned parents was disintegrating, brick by lying brick. Maya called me back to the narrative. She walked me through the history, not as a sob story, but as a timeline of financial predation. Aubrey, she asked, when was the first time your identity was used without your permission? When I was 17, I said. My father forged my signature on a credit card application. I found out when I was 22 and tried to buy a car. My credit was ruined. And recently? 3 weeks ago, I said, a loan application for $25,000 was submitted to QuickSure Finance in my name. The application included a photo of my driver's license, a photo I never authorized. Who had access to your driver's license? Only my parents, I said, during a visit to my home. Maya nodded, then turned to the bailiff. I would like to call Ruth Mercer to the stand. My grandmother stood up. She walked slowly, her cane tapping a steady rhythm on the floor, but her head was high. She took the oath with a clear, strong voice. She sat down and adjusted her glasses. She did not look at Mark. She looked straight at the judge. Mrs. Mercer, Maya said gently, you are Mark Keene's mother? I am, Ruth said, though today, I am not sure I want to claim him. Can you tell the court about the financial dynamic in the Keene household when Aubrey was a child? Ruth took a breath. They used her, she said simply. Mark and Linda never wanted to work. They wanted to be taken care of. When Aubrey started working at the grocery store at 16, they stopped paying the electric bill. They told her it was her turn. I watched that girl hand over her entire paycheck on a Friday, and on Saturday, I would see Mark coming home with a new set of golf clubs or a carton of cigarettes. Did they ever pay her back? Never, Ruth said. They drained her, Your Honor. They drained her of her childhood, and now they are trying to drain her of her adulthood. It wasn't support. It was a tax on her existence. The judge was taking notes furiously now. Henderson stood up to cross-examine Ruth, but he looked defeated. He asked a few weak questions about whether Ruth held a grudge against Linda, but Ruth brushed them off like gnats. Then Henderson made a mistake. He called Linda back to the stand for rebuttal, hoping to salvage her image. Mrs. Keene, Henderson asked, about the text messages. Did you really buy a phone just to fake them? Linda looked trapped. She looked at the judge, then at Mark, then at the gallery. The pressure was visibly crushing her. I didn't think the number mattered, she blurted out, her voice shrill. I knew what she meant to say. I knew she owed us. I just wanted to show the court the truth of her heart, even if she didn't write the words herself. A collective gasp went through the room. Even Henderson closed his eyes. So you admit, Maya said, standing up from her chair, her voice ringing out like a bell, that you fabricated the evidence? You admit you knew the texts were not from Aubrey? It doesn't matter, Linda screamed, standing up in the witness box. She owes us. She is our daughter. We own her. Sit down, Mrs. Keene, the judge barked, slamming his gavel. Linda sat, shrinking into herself, realizing too late that she had just confessed to fraud on the record. Maya walked to the center of the room. She signaled to the bailiff, who dimmed the lights. The projector screen descended. Your Honor, Maya said, the petitioners claim that there is an implied contract of support. They claim that family obligation overrides all else, but we have proof that they knowingly and willingly signed away that claim. She placed the first document on the glass. It was the declaration I had tricked them into signing at the notary office 3 years ago. The one I swapped with the car loan papers. Exhibit D, Maya said. A declaration of financial independence, signed by Mark and Linda Keene 3 years ago. In this document, they explicitly waive any right to claim support from Aubrey Keene under state law. She zoomed in on the signatures. Mark's arrogant scrawl, Linda's loopy script, the notary seal. They signed this, Maya explained, because they were too busy trying to secure a car loan to read what was in front of them. But a signature is a signature. Then she swapped it for the second document, the one from the diner, signed just weeks ago. And Exhibit E, Maya said, signed 14 days ago. In this affidavit, Mark and Linda Keene affirm that they are separate financial entities from their daughter and, crucially, that they have never and will never use her identity for credit purposes. Maya turned to look at my parents. Mark was pale, his mouth hanging open. He was staring at the screen, staring at the trap he had walked into with his eyes wide shut. He realized now that the administrative paperwork at the diner wasn't a hoop to jump through. It was a confession. They signed these documents to get money, Maya said to the judge. They signed them because they are greedy and because they underestimated their daughter. They thought she was weak. They thought she was a checkbook. They did not realize she was keeping records. Judge Holloway leaned forward. He adjusted his glasses and peered at the screen. "Read paragraph 4, the judge commanded. Maya stepped back. The judge read it aloud himself, his deep voice filling the silence of the courtroom. We, Mark and Linda Keene, acknowledge that our daughter, Aubrey Keene, is not financially obligated to support us now or in the future, and we hereby release her from any and all claims of maintenance, holding her harmless for our debts and liabilities." The words hung in the air. They were absolute. They were final. I watched my parents. Linda was sobbing quietly, not the fake performance tears from earlier, but the ugly, terrified tears of someone who sees the walls closing in. Mark was slumped in his chair. Defeated. The arrogance was gone. The entitlement was gone. He looked small. He looked like exactly what he was, a con artist who had been caught by his own mark. They had come here to strip me of my future. Instead, they had just watched their past lies dismantled, piece by piece, until there was nothing left to hide behind. I looked at Ruth. She gave me a small, grim smile. I looked at Maya. She sat down and capped her pen. "The defense rests," Maya said. And in the silence that followed, I felt the heavy, suffocating weight of my childhood finally lift off my shoulders. It drifted up into the sterile air of the courtroom and vanished. I was free. I just needed the judge to say it. The courtroom was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the air conditioning vents in the ceiling. Judge Holloway stacked the papers in front of him, tapping the edges against the bench to align them. It was a slow, deliberate sound. Tap, tap, tap. He removed his reading glasses and folded them, placing them next to the gavel. Then, he looked down at the defense table, where my parents sat. Mark was slumped over, his face a mottled red, while Linda was dabbing at her eyes with a tissue that was now shredded to pieces. "In 30 years on the bench," Judge Holloway began, his voice low, but carrying to every corner of the room, "I have seen many families tear each other apart over money. I have seen greed. I have seen desperation. But rarely have I seen such a calculated misuse of this court's time and resources." He picked up the petition my parents had filed. "The petitioners came before this court claiming destitution," the judge continued. "They claimed abandonment. They presented sworn affidavits detailing a lack of assets. And yet, the evidence presented by the defense, evidence that was not refuted, shows a clear pattern of hidden assets, undeclared income, and discretionary spending that contradicts every claim made in this filing." Mark opened his mouth to speak, but the judge raised a hand, silencing him instantly. "Furthermore," Holloway said, his eyes narrowing, The submission of Exhibit A, the text messages, appears to be a deliberate fabrication. Submitting falsified evidence to a court of law is not a strategy. Mr. Keene, it is fraud. It is an insult to the judicial process. We just needed help, Linda wailed suddenly, her voice cracking. She stood up, leaning over the table, ignoring her lawyer's hand trying to pull her down. We are her parents. We raised her. Doesn't that count for anything? We just needed help, and she has so much. Sit down, Mrs. Keene, the judge barked. Linda sank back into her chair, sobbing loudly into her hands. It was the sound of a child who had finally been told no for the first time in her life. The petition is dismissed, the judge announced, and let me be clear for the record, it is dismissed with prejudice. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 20 years. With prejudice, it meant it was over. They could not refile. They could not fix the typos and try again next month. It was a legal door slamming shut and locking forever. Additionally, the judge said, writing on the docket, I am sanctioning the petitioners for the submission of frivolous filings and falsified documents. You are ordered to pay the respondents' legal fees in full. Furthermore, I am referring the matter of the fabricated text messages and the identity misuse involving the driver's license to the district attorney's office for review regarding potential criminal charges. Mark shot up out of his chair. Criminal charges? She is my daughter. You are going to arrest me for trying to get help from my own daughter? She is destroying her own family. Mark pointed a shaking finger at me. Look at her, sitting there in her fancy suit while we rot. She is doing this. She is the villain here. Judge Holloway slammed the gavel down. The sound was like a gunshot. Mr. Keene, silence, the judge commanded. He leaned forward, his granite face set in stone. Let me make something very clear to you. Family status does not grant you the right to commit fraud. It does not grant you the right to steal an identity, and it certainly does not grant you a lien on your adult child's income. You do not own her, and this court will not assist you in your extortion. The words hung in the air. You do not own her. I had waited my entire life to hear someone say that. I had whispered it to myself in my dorm room. I had written it in my journal. But hearing it from a judge, spoken into the public record, gave it a weight that finally crushed the guilt I had been carrying. Court is adjourned, the judge said. He stood up and swept out of the room, his black robe billowing behind him. The bailiff moved toward the door. The tension in the room broke, replaced by the shuffling of papers and the clicking of briefcases. I stood up. My legs felt steady. Linda was still crying, but the sound had changed. It was no longer a performance. It was the terrified weeping of a woman who realized she had gambled everything and lost. Mark was staring at the table, his face pale, muttering to himself. I turned to look at the gallery. Ruth was already standing. She walked toward the railing, her cane tapping softly. I met her there. She reached out and took my hand. Her skin was paper thin, but her grip was iron. She didn't smile. She didn't cheer. She just looked at me with those sharp, clear blue eyes. You did what had to be done, Ruth said. I started, searching for the word. I feel light. That is the weight of the dead wood falling off, Ruth said. She squeezed my hand one last time. Go, walk out of here. Do not look back. I nodded. Maya was waiting for me by the door, packing up her files. We will file the motion for legal fees tomorrow, Maya said, her voice brisk and professional, though her eyes were warm. They will probably have to sell the camper to pay it. Maybe the rental property too. I don't care how they pay it, I said, as long as it isn't with my money. We walked out of the courtroom and into the wide, echoing hallway. I thought I could just leave. I thought I could walk to the elevator and vanish. But they were waiting. Linda and Mark were standing near the water fountain. Linda's makeup was smeared down her cheeks. Mark looked like he had aged 10 years in the last hour. When they saw me, they stepped into my path. Are you happy? Mark hissed. His voice was venomous, low and shaking. Are you happy now? Aubrey, you humiliated us. You dragged your mother through the mud in front of strangers. Everyone is going to know, Linda spat, her voice trembling with rage. I will tell everyone. I will tell them you chose money over blood. You will be alone. Aubrey, you will have all that money and you will have no one. I stopped. I looked at them. For years, that threat would have paralyzed me. The fear of being alone, of being the bad daughter, would have made me reach for my checkbook. But I looked at Mark, with his thrift store suit and his entitlement. I looked at Linda, with her fake tears and her burner phone. I didn't see parents. I saw strangers who shared my DNA. I didn't choose money over blood, I said quietly. My voice did not shake. I chose honesty over manipulation, and if that means I am alone, then I am okay with that. I stepped around them. You will regret this, Mark shouted after me, his voice echoing off the tile walls. You will come crawling back when you need us. I didn't stop. I kept walking. Elena was waiting by the elevators. She had been sitting in the back row, silent as a guard dog. She grinned when she saw me, holding up her phone. I snapped a picture of the stamped dismissal order, she said, showing me the screen. I am going to frame it for your office. It is the most expensive guilt trip they will ever take. I laughed. It was a short, startled sound, but it was real. It cost them a duplex, I said. Worth it, Elena said. The elevator doors opened. We stepped inside. As the doors slid shut, I caught one last glimpse of my parents. They were arguing with each other now. Mark was waving his hands, blaming Linda. Linda was crying, blaming the lawyer. They were devouring each other, just as they had always done. The doors closed, sealing them away. We walked out of the courthouse and onto the wide stone steps. The air outside was crisp and cold, smelling of dried leaves and rain. It was October in Ohio. The sky was a bruised purple, but the sun was breaking through the clouds in the west. I took a deep breath. The air filled my lungs, sharp and clean. I looked down at the papers in my hand, the court order, the dismissal, the boundary. For years, I had thought that freedom would feel like a celebration. I thought there would be confetti. I thought I would feel a surge of joy. It wasn't joy, it was peace. It was the quiet, steady hum of a life that finally belonged to me. I thought about the box of ledgers in my car. I thought about the note where my father wrote times 10. I thought about the little girl who paid the electric bill so the lights wouldn't go out. She was safe now. Come on, Elena said, nudging my shoulder. I know a place that serves really expensive champagne, and guess who is paying? I am, I said, smiling, and I am happy to do it. I walked down the steps, my heels clicking on the stone. I didn't look back at the courthouse. I didn't look back at the windows where my parents were likely still screaming at their attorney. I just walked toward the parking lot, toward my car, toward my apartment with the paid-off furniture and the silence that I had earned. They came to collect a lifetime of imagined debts, but all they walked away with was the truth. Thank you so much for listening to this story on Lila Revenge Stories. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Please leave a comment below with your city or country, so we can see how far this story has traveled. If you enjoyed seeing justice served, please hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this video reach more people who need to hear that it is okay to choose yourself. See you in the next story.